They came with open arms. Their swords were sheathed, their banners lowered, smiles painted across their faces. The drums of war had fallen silent, and in their place, music, wine, roasted meat, and laughter filled the night. It was the promise of peace after decades of bloodshed. But by dawn, the banquet hall would be a slaughterhouse, and the guests who had arrived as honored allies would lie cold on the ground, betrayed not by enemies, but by those who had once called them brothers. This is not a fable. This happened, and it changed history forever. Let me take you to 13th century Europe, to a world where power was everything, and trust was the deadliest weapon of all. The setting was southern France. The land was fragmented, controlled by noble houses, small kingdoms, and powerful warlords. Among them were the Cathars, a religious sect that dared to believe something different. They lived simple lives, rejecting the riches of the church and the violence of the nobility. Their beliefs, heresy according to Rome. The church didn't argue with words. It argued with fire and steel. The Albigensian Crusade had already ravaged the region. Entire villages were wiped from the map, thousands burned at the stake. But the Cathars endured, hidden in mountain strongholds, protected by local lords who valued honor more than fear. One of those lords was Raymond Trencavel, Viscount of Béziers and Carcassonne, a young noble barely in his 20s, known for his tolerance and bravery. He refused to expel the Cathars from his lands, and for that he became a target. Enter Simon de Montfort, a devout and ruthless French noble chosen to lead the Crusader army. He had the Pope's blessing, and the promise of land if he succeeded. What followed was not a war. It was a purge. City by city, castle by castle, the Crusaders advanced. They were not here to convert. They were here to exterminate. But after years of bloodshed, something unexpected happened. In the town of Massacre, high in the Pyrenees, leaders from both sides gathered. Trencavel's successor, and a group of rebel lords tired of war, extended an olive branch. And to everyone's surprise, the Crusaders accepted it. Peace was proposed. Terms were drawn. A grand feast was to be held in the town of Avignonet to seal the agreement. Delegates, local lords, and envoys from both sides were invited. It was hailed as the beginning of a new era, a rare chance to stop the blood. That night, the great hall was filled with music and dancing. The scent of roasted lamb and spices drifted through the air. Goblets overflowed with wine. Words of brotherhood were spoken. Even the stone-faced knights of Montfort seemed relaxed, unarmored, blending in with the crowd. But hidden among the guests were men who bore no joy. They bore daggers. Unseen in the shadows were Montfort's secret agents. Waiting, watching, and then, on a signal no one remembers, they moved. It happened fast. The doors were bolted. The music stopped, and the knives came out. Men who had just toasted to peace were gutted on the floor. Noblemen stabbed as they reached for more wine. A troubadour singing in the corner had his throat slit mid-note. There were no screams, only confusion, choking, and silence. Blood soaked the tablecloths. The floor was slick with betrayal. By morning, over a dozen key rebel leaders lay dead. The Cathar movement would never recover. Montfort claimed it was self-defense, that they had discovered a plot against the church. But no weapons were found on the guests. No plans, no conspiracies. Only broken oaths and mutilated bodies. But this wasn't just an act of war. It was psychological. It was a message. Never trust a promise of peace, especially when it comes from the mouth of a crusader. What followed was the collapse of organized Cathar resistance. Their final fortress, Massacre, would fall less than a year later. Over 200 believers would be burned alive in a mass execution, refusing to recant their faith. As for the traitors who orchestrated the feast, they were rewarded with lands, gold, and titles. Their names were praised in church sermons as defenders of the faith. But history remembers them differently. In local folklore, their names are cursed. For generations, children in the Languedoc region were told, "Beware the feast that starts with smiles. It may end with slaughter." And yet, we forget. Again and again, across time, history repeats its darkest trick. From Roman banquets to medieval treaties, from colonial handshakes to modern-day truces, some of the worst betrayals in human history have happened not on the battlefield, but at the dinner table. Because peace is not always the absence of war. Sometimes peace is a weapon, sharpened behind closed doors, dressed in fine silk, and served with wine. So the next time you hear about a historic agreement, listen closely and ask yourself, is it truly peace being offered, or just the calm before the blade?